think you'd be here. Do you remember what it was like 20 years ago?
Yes. For all time's sake.
Yeah, like that ever got us anywhere.
Where were you?
I don't know, I don't remember much these days.
Are you going back?
I think one falls in love with the place and has to keep on coming back.
Are you going back?
I just forgot how pregnant this place is. The history of things being here with us. The old world is dying. And the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters.
Hello and welcome to The Living Room, brought to you by Curzon Home Cinema. If you're watching this live, you can join the conversation either in the comments on YouTube or via Twitter with the handle @CurzonCinemas, and please use the hashtag Luxor. Luxor is the beguiling and visually resplendent second feature by writer-director Zeina Dura. It's also Zeina's second collaboration with Karim Saleh, who stars opposite the film's lead, Andrea Riseborough. And I'm delighted to welcome all three, Zeina, Andrea, and Karim, to this discussion this evening. Hello, all.
Hello.
I think we have the others. Hi, guys.
Hello.
So we're going to get some audience questions in a short while, but I'll start with a couple. Zeina, I gather that the film was inspired by a dream.
Yes, so I was pretty down about a film that I'd been working on for a while. It wasn't coming together, and my producers were like, you should do something else first and we'll come back to this one. And that night I went to bed and I had this dream, and it was quite intense, this image of this woman walking, and then I had to kind of unpack all the feelings. And the next day I was on the phone to a friend of mine who's a cinematographer, and I said, I think this might be my next film. And so we said, okay, what would it be about? And I was telling her what I think it's about. And then she goes, well, whatever it is, it sounds amazing, I'd love to shoot it. And then I asked her the big question, well, would you do it for nothing? And she goes, yeah, sure. So then I called up this Egyptian producer, and he to see how much would cost to make a movie for nothing out there. And then he said, well, it sounds great, I'll do it. And weirdly, he was in town for the London Film Festival, and he was literally not far from my house as well. So it's just the whole thing happened so easily. It's kind of, I still am quite distrustful of the story because it's happened so fast.
And so how quickly, I assume you've been to Luxor before?
Yes, but I had been when I was I feel like a preteen or just teenage years, and but I have a neighbor who I've realized now, after all these Q&As I've been having, I realized actually it might have been kind of on my mind because I have a really cool neighbor who's from Luxor. She's half Italian, half Egyptian, and she grew up in Luxor, and maybe she was talking about it a lot or something, and it was somehow she brought it back into my subconscious. It's not a place that you can forget when you go there. It's one of those, it's indelibly printed on your on your brain. But so I think it might be because she had been around. I don't know, she was on this.
And so in the early stages, were you drawing from your own memory and conversation with other people, or did you go on a research trip there as well?
Okay, so this is the funniest part. So I'm like, okay, well, I really need to write this. I need to go out there. But before I go out there, I have to have some kind of vague idea. I don't want to go out there just with no plan, So I kind of sat with all the emotions I was thinking. And then I did stuff I remembered where I'd gone, and then I would sort of Google Earth and, silly things like, what's that thing we used to use as students? Lonely Planet and that kind of stuff, And then I was like, okay, this kind of gives me some idea of what I was dealing with. And then I went out there on my own for 5 days, which was heaven. And I stayed at the Winter Palace, and I just kind of maybe it was even 4 days. I just sort of walked around, really absorbed it. And when I'd gone for those 4 days, during that period, I had two really interesting conversations. one with Salima Ikram, the archaeologist, who was my main advisor and really kind of such a major part of this film. She acted in it, her knowledge lifted it from being just this kind of thing to this sort of quite important discourse. And because you need an expert when you're talking about that stuff. No matter how much I read, I'm never going to be her, right? So it was really awesome that she could sort of give us all these tips and where we should film if I wanted to convey certain emotions and so on. And so we had her. And then also when I was there, I finally managed to speak to these women who I had looked up, because I wanted to do different types of elements of spirituality there. So I wanted to do like the archaeology, and then there's all these kind of new age tourists. So I had Googled like female cults, Luxor Temple, and like all that kind of stuff. And they had come up with some cult of Isis or something, and I found this name, and then I further Googled her, and she was now had this thing called, some kind of travel company where she takes you to Egypt and she tells you stuff. So then she's on the phone with me in those 4 days, and I think it's my first Zoom call actually, because she used Zoom and I'd never heard of Zoom. I'm like, who uses Zoom? And she was this older lady, and she's awesome. She's called Nikki Scully, and she was on the phone with her like someone she's sort of her disciple, but now who's like another teacher, Indigo. And she sort of telling me that she'd first gone out to Egypt with the Grateful Dead because her husband managed the band, and then she was basically a conduit for ancient Egyptian thought, and she was this actually quite respected kind of scholar. And so between Salima's knowledge, this woman and the Grateful Dead info and all that stuff, and then me hanging out in these places, just really trying to understand what's going on, I kind of had a really great research trip. And then Mo, my producer, showed up on the last day, and I made him go to a local healer with me. And I wasn't really friends at the time, so it was like a really intimate thing where we went. It is great. He was literally about to take a plane back to Cairo, because he literally is like a real producer. Like, he came in for like 3 hours, had breakfast with me, and then was like flying back. And I said, listen, you've got to come with me. Like, I don't know where I'm going. And there was this woman called Migruna, something, Mother of the Horns, or something like that. And I had to go see her. So I go to see this woman. She's like, there's an Egyptian, I think a novelist called Yahya Haqqi, who's like a really it's like a very 20th century Egyptian literature. And he always has these blind, there's always someone blind, or there's always like stuff, there's some kind of like blind person that knows something kind of thing in modern, like in 20th century modern Egyptian literature. And that was that woman. And she you go into this little house, and then she starts to sort of like soothsay and all this sort of stuff. And me and Mo were like suddenly have all this really personal stuff about us flying around the room. It was quite funny. Anyway, that was my research trip. It was really good.
I want to come back to some of the characters in the film in a short while, but Andrew, what were your first impressions on reading Zaina's script?
I mean, it is such a beautiful screenplay, and we really are. There's improvisation in there, but we really are very true to it as well. It was sort of perfect. It was just a beautiful study of grief and hope. So I read the screenplay. I watched her first film, which I loved so much and still do, for its humor, for its levity and its sadness. And I was just so taken with Zaina's first film. And then we spoke, and I was in Senegal, and we had a FaceTime, and it was a matter of days, really. And then I was on a plane, and there were no decisions. This film really wanted to be made. I think even in its inception, when Zaina talks about it, having worked on a different film for so long, and and I think we've all had that experience trying to push a square peg in a round hole, or a round peg in a square hole for such a long time, and it's not happening. And then something that just needed to come bubbled up to the surface. It just needed to happen. And this film did that. And there was a complicity really almost immediately. We had a shorthand. Karim and I met a couple of literally days after the first time I spoke to Zaina. And then we were making the film. We were there making the film.
And Karim, I mentioned earlier that you previously worked with Zaina on her feature debut. So did you have some idea of what to expect?
Well, I knew to expect that Zaina would be surprising, and that she's somebody who has the capacity to really evolve from one project to the next. And I also, having known her over the years, understood that her process is extremely intimate, but she also draws from literature and in this case archaeology and other ideas. So whenever I'm about to read a script by Zaina, I know not to expect the previous script. And this was a script where I wasn't privy to the writing of it. I was never sent an earlier draft. This was something that was sent to me, and I was reading it in its final form for the first time. And the beautiful thing about Zaina's work is I read it entirely as an object outside of Zaina and outside of myself and outside of film even. It was a very beautiful read. And while I was reading it, I was really taken by it. A script is not literature, but it was almost that for me when I was reading it. I was just happy to be reading it.
What's quite lovely about the film is that we find out so much about the characters through expressions and the interaction between the two main characters on the screen. I'm just curious about the backstories, though. How much of a backstory did the two characters have? How much were they informed by conversations that you two had with Zaina, or was it something that you went off and sort of created your own backstories beyond what was in the screenplay? Perhaps Andrea.
This part's very hard to articulate. But I think it might be a sign of enjoyable filmmaking. There was very little said. And there was very little said, but so much understood, I think. It happened very quickly. We had a short time to prepare. But I think Luxor as a place and the ancient civilization that it holds and the ancient civilization spirituality that's there informed so much of what we were doing. I tell me if I'm wrong, but it felt like we'd already known each other when we met for a lifetime, if not more. And really, as in many ways as sparse as the script is, it's so turgid with emotion. Zaina has a real talent for being able to pinpoint succinctly beautiful and telling moments in people's lives with very few words. So yes, I mean, does anybody else want to?
Well, in my case, it was a combination of two things. I did the usual amount of work that I usually do on my own, and then I had to completely let it go, and knowing that I would have to let it go, and that this was very much something that was going to be created entirely with Zaina and Andrea. But in terms of a background, my mother works in zones of conflict. She's been going on missions to Baghdad, working with children that were affected by war. I grew up in the war. I was privy and really held my mother's hand through her trauma growing up. There was a lot of that. My father writes historical poetry. He has a tendency to be very sort of archaeologically driven. He's an academic. We're all from different places in the world, like Sultan, who works in America, who has roots in the Middle East. There was a lot that I could tap into and summon and get myself filled with before I arrived. And then, of course, when I arrived, I realized that, okay, now it's time to have an experience. But there was a lot of preparation, and Jungian psychology and all the archetypes and all that work was, I think it was serendipitous in a sense, because I had been reading a lot of Jung at that time, and there was a lot of Egyptian pieces in Jungian psychology And so when I read Zaina's script, I almost felt, okay, is Zaina reading my mind again? You know, how perfect is this?
Also,
Yeah.
very separately. Oh, sorry, Zaina.
No,
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, those two things were very separate for me. The emotional connection that Hannah and Sultan had, and this experience that she'd been through in terms of my research. So as I researched what she might have been through on that Jordanian-Syrian border, that was something that was held so privately and quietly throughout the experience, because in the film we're not dealing with that necessarily verbally, but she understands that Sultan can hold that for her, and she understands that without it needing to be expressed, you can imagine exactly where she's been. And so that part of the research was incredibly private for me. But what I tried to, having not met Karim yet, what I tried to take into that research before I arrived was the idea that there is this love, that there has been this love, and it's unresolved. It's still vastly open. And so even as she's doing that work and going through the horror really of what she was going through, she somewhere she was keeping that in her heart as a sort of a source of strength.
Zaina.
Gosh, there's so much has been said. Okay. I think that it sounds so, again, we're going to sound quite kooky by the end of this Q&A, because every time we do them, we get more and more like kind of Jungian. But yeah, so when I spoke to Karim, he's like, oh my God, this is really weird. I've just been reading all this stuff about this. This is kind of perfect. And then when we all met, like when Andrew and I met, I literally felt like I'd gone to school with her and that we knew each other super well. And we were old friends. And it was very easy to talk to her. And obviously Karim, I'd worked with before and is a great friend. So it just was like just working with really good people. And then I love the fact that Andrea kept her stuff personal, her war stuff personal, because I think that's the key to like having that weight, you know, because if it was like running around in huge discussions, then it wouldn't have been so stuck in her, you know, which was the whole point. And also what I love is the fact, basically they just said everything, because, you know, the idea that he's Middle Eastern, so he gets it. You know, like I'm married to an Iranian American, and that is no coincidence that I'm married to someone like that, because he just gets it and he's with me, and we don't have to have, here are the reading lists about the Middle East, and also like, but then, you know, he's not from there, he's also grew up in Texas and England and whatever. So it's just like that, like she's saying, it's just this thing you have with someone which is very intimate and it's unsaid, and it just keeps you going when the world goes a bit more and more crazy. You have that, and it's kind of sacred. And I love the fact that they immediately, you know, we had some conversations about that, like back, you know, they were there, and when they were both like, you know, in Cairo doing years abroad and that kind of stuff. But you know, that's kind of obvious from the script. And there were a few, there were a few. I'm sure you remember this, guys, and I love this story. There were a few. There were 2 flashbacks that were going to be in it, but like very much influenced by the passengers. They're not like cheesy. Like I was going to do some really cool like kind of, you know, in camera kind of moves, whatever. And then I got to Cairo, and because we'd had like no time to prepare, I didn't know that Cairo had Egypt didn't have very good wigs. So I speak to the costume guy. I'm like, well, yeah, you know, for this, I want her to have like a wig because her hair's like very different. And I think when she'd be younger, it'd be like really like long, and he would have a different haircut. And he's like, yeah, but the wigs aren't very good. How are we going to get the wigs? And we don't have the button. I'm like, oh my God, wigs. And then I suddenly just saw this like really just like, there was no point even trying to shoot it because those things have to be perfect. And I thought, well, maybe you can shoot, they could both wear bandanas, which is so like kind of 90s. But I'm like, no, that's like too like R&B. So then the whole thing just went mental. So yeah, so we managed to portray all of that without the wigs and the...
I think definitely good not having bandanas. That was a good move.
Sans flashback bandanas.
Imagine.
Good call.
Something that I felt this film had in common with your first film, The Imperialists Are Still Alive. This idea, you've got central characters not from the place where the action unfolds. But I watch too many films where it's so focused on the characters, they don't interact in any way with the world around them. And looking at your two films, that's something that happens constantly. Manhattan is such a central role of that first film. And obviously, Luxor now. Could you talk a little bit about how you deal with the relationship between characters and place, Amy?
It's a super, it sounds so pretentious. It's a super organic process. Organic always sounds like, but it really is. It just kind of, I write and it happens because it might be the way that I see myself always from outside, and I'm always kind of looking at my place somewhere, and it's just something kind of psychological that I go through. And it might be because I'm from somewhere but born here and very English, yet like all these different identities, and it's a fusion, not like I don't feel like I'm torn. It's just, I think it's a great like for me. I love the combination. But I think there's two things. I think it's organic for me. I have a way of seeing things that might be a little different because I am brought up here. I'm also a New Yorker, but I'm a Londoner, but I'm a, you know, and also with my first film, don't think that was easy. They were like, there are 103 speaking parts. You need to get rid of them. I'm like, no, this is the movie. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, the movie is layers. I see when I make a film, it's about layers of interactions, whether it's, and then costume and dialogue and the way I'm cutting things. And it's all very much, everything is a very, very, there's a very delicate balance between everything. And all these elements have to be there for me, for the film to be what I'm actually dealing with and to be interesting. And with my first film, it was, because it was my first film, I'm really glad that my main producer really believed in me, but a lot of really quite senior people who had a lot of knowledge even said to me afterwards, how did you know not to listen to us? And I was like, because I just felt it in my gut that wouldn't be my city, you know? It wouldn't be my version of New York or New York in general, you know? And same with this one. I mean, I wish in a way, God, remember that, remember when we were filming in the Oasis Hotel? And there was that guy with the toupee at the desk. Do you remember him?
I think vaguely.
Do you not remember him? There was this amazing supporting actor who had like a toupee, a background actor. And I was like, and we had literally, because we shot this in 18 days, we had
this film. Yes, I remember him.
Remember
Sorry,
him?
talking about your
wanted
first
to give
film.
him like a, yeah.
Yes,
I wanted to give him a major role, but I couldn't because
You'd have thunk we'd have talked this much about fake hair on this Q&A.
Could you not have just asked to borrow the toupee?
It deals with hair loss.
Well, ancient Egyptians would shave their head and always wear wigs.
well, there you go. The archaeologists speak. So for him, it was really painful for me that I literally had 18 days to shoot this, and the AD was on my case, and he was like, "You've got 5 minutes to finish this entire scene of like 20 shots." And I was like, "But the guy," and I still to this day when I watch the film, I'm like, "Oh my God, the little toupee, like the guy. I wish he would." And that's really because I see life as these moments of texture that I really. And that's why I make films. That's what interests me. Like, it's like almost like the story is a vehicle for all these other kind of really interesting textual things that are also part of the story that make the story. But I don't think I could ever tell a story without them. I'd be very bored. It might be like a soap opera if I did it without those little elements.
But it's also the way of undercutting expectations. So we have a title of a film called Luxor. Most people know where Luxor is and what it represents.
Oh wait, some people think it's a casino. That happened to me. I'm like, what? They're like, oh, you mean? Oh no! And also, is there somewhere like someone's like, are you in Luxor? Is there somewhere Luxor, Nevada, or is that me making it up?
There's the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas.
Yeah, Las Vegas. Someone was like to me, literally, someone quite educated was like, oh, so you filmed in Vegas? I'm like, no. Why? Yeah. Anyway.
It was that how you then created that character in the film, the American?
No, this is the best story. I don't know how much time I have, but a quick story and a shout out to my husband who is Texan Iranian. So he has these really funny friends who I actually really love and who are actually really clever, but they just have this persona of being really loud. And I sort of, because I've hung out with them now and I know the nuances, I really wanted to have someone like that in there for a couple of reasons. Number one, the region in conflict, you always have these Americans. So whenever there's a war zone, there's 0 tourists, there's the NGO people, and then there's like the American generals or the guys in security, or like, I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've met from like random places in the Midwest on a plane coming from like Beirut to like Amman. We're like, what were you doing there? I was in security, you know. And then some even, it's really bad. Some even have these little briefcases and wear like khaki. I mean, they're not even trying to hide it, you know. So you've kind of got that kind of element, and then you have the NGO one. And so I really wanted to represent that element of the kind of modern colonialist kind of vibe with this American character who was clearly there on business. And we had, unfortunately, because of the film, we had to take out some of the scenes, but in it you hear that he's been working in the region and all this kind of stuff. And so I kind of explained it in a previous version of the film. Where was I? Because I've gone off on a tangent now.
Well, I've got a few questions coming in. So this one's from Joe from Leeds, for you, Andrea. Luxor and Possessor, the Brandon Cronenberg film, are both coming out in the UK a few weeks apart and couldn't be more different. Can you talk about the different experiences and what actually makes you choose roles like this?
Well, I spoke a little bit about how I was drawn to this one. So I was already about to shoot Possessor, so I flew straight from Egypt to Toronto, sort of at the end of the winter in Toronto, which was an odd experience, and began Possessor immediately. Why I wanted to work on Possessor was because I was a huge fan of Brandon Cronenberg's first film, Antiviral, and I was so happy he'd sent me the script for his next film, and so that was a joy, and I was very grateful to do that. Yes, they are completely different, but strangely, and it's difficult to even imagine having us, you know, 1 week being Hannah and then the next week playing this character Taskia Voss in the other film. I think, in a sense, Hannah was the rejuvenation that I needed, and I also found so many things that I didn't know that I would find. So it was such a sort of special, magical experience that, in a sense, I think playing Hannah was one of the most pivotal moments, I think, of my life. So I assume that I probably couldn't have gone on to play Voss had I not had that experience. And I'm really grateful to Zaina and to Karim for letting me be part of that.
I've got another question here from Joanna from Bath. I think the film is really beautiful. Was it easy to get permission to film in Luxor? And what impressed you all about most in terms of the sites you visited?
We had this really phenomenal Egyptian producer. He's like the #1 art house guy in the Middle East. He's called Mohammed Hefzi, and he managed to get us these. I mean, when Andrea said to me, I was like, yeah, sure. But I was like, I put down the phone. She's like, yeah, sure, I can come, but we've got to go in 2 weeks' time, and I've got 3 weeks. And I'm like, sure, great. I put down the phone, no, we need permits now. And we were just like, panic. But we got the permits, like, because Mo is very efficient and very well known there and everything. So we managed to get the permits, and we'd already started the back work, like the background work for them, and sort of been processing. So it was all okay. But it was literally like, and I don't know if you guys know this, but some days you're like, so are we going to film there today? Did we get permission? And they're like, yes, it came through, you know? And so like, it was literally every day we were like, we're supposed to film somewhere, but we didn't really know. So that was that. And I guess then those guys, Karim and Andrea can answer the question about like, which ones they like the most. Because obviously I just shot in all the places I felt I resonated with the most. I mean, Seti the First was just insanely amazing, that place. But you guys, I hand over to you.
Actually, have both of you been to Luxor before, or was this your first time? Karim and Andrea?
I hadn't been to
I hadn't, but I think I really think that when you arrive, it has the feel of somewhere that is strangely familiar, and of course that makes sense in the human journey. That makes a lot of sense. I think they were all. I mean, it was a massive privilege because we were shooting in places that the public hadn't stepped into some of the places that we were shooting, and we're so used to seeing naff Egyptian sets in Hollywood movies. So every place was profoundly special and different. Sekhmet's tomb was, I mean, not only moving for us all, but sort of difficult for us all. I think we all came out of their cast and crew a little shaky and holding on to each other. It's difficult to articulate exactly what kind of experience you have in a place as timeless as Luxor. And it really is its own character in the film. It represents so much more than this tourist site that it is, which is also important because people make a pilgrimage of sorts to go and see it. The tourists are making a sort of pilgrimage to understand ancient civilization spirituality, which is in of itself very important. But it's difficult to say to explain how moving those experiences are in those tombs.
Corinne?
One of the privileges of being in a tomb that is in the process of being excavated, or a place that isn't seen very much in the media, is that you're not influenced by the modern discourse or the explanation. Those places are very much influenced by the stories we tell ourselves about them. And they're so open to projection and so open to interpretation. And the way that Salima Ikram led us through those places was by giving us information that was vital, but not without defining those places for us. So I think in those discoveries, the amount of discovery that we needed to have with each other and with each other's psyches, and the amount of the place that the unknown had to take in our own minds and in our own hearts was mirrored by some of the things we didn't know about those particular sites that hadn't gone on the History Channel and other places where these things are exploited sometimes for the sake of sometimes sci-fi, but sometimes for the sake of a very pragmatic scientific point of view. So I think as much as Sultan was an archaeologist, for me, that wasn't about archaeology. It really was about our feelings and our minds and our psyches coming together. And I think the discovery really facilitated that.
I've got a final question here. This is from Ruth in London about the role of Abydos, however you want to pronounce it, various ways in the film. The role, and I don't know if you guys want to answer this or keep it a mystery. Could you talk about the role that it plays for Hannah and Sultan? And she says here that she felt for her it was like the Paris that Rick and Ilsa have in Casablanca. This memory of a place of something from the past that will always remain as is. I don't know, do you want to answer that, or do you want to keep it a mystery?
I think for me, it's definitely an element of that. And then also it's this really holy place that if you go there, it blows your mind. And we were meant to shoot there and we had permits to shoot there. But I just realized with 18 days, it would be very unrealistic to put my crew through that and cast, because most of us didn't have Egyptian passport. Well, no, you say me, Andrew, Kareem, whatever, we didn't have Egyptian passports, so we'd have to take an 8-hour journey to get there, whereas the Egyptians could get there in 2 hours. And so it just would be really long. Anyway, the point is that this place was so spectacular and it was so hard not to film there, but I decided it was crazy to do that. So it was sort of this place, like she says, which has this place for them, but then at the same time it's a place where there's hope, there's enlightenment. It is the holiest site for them, so there's this kind of idea of something greater, an elevation of where they are. They're like moving on to something bigger.
Kareem, Andrea?
Yeah, I like the idea of it as an El Dorado of sorts, as the part of the psyche that is that you can get, the unknown. I like the idea of the unknown, and the fact that even by answering the question, it's going to stay a mystery, because I think that's the function of it. That became the function of it. And even in the way that Zaina described the place, she described it as such an impactful place, and she described the experience as being so profound that it almost became the answer to why we weren't going to go there. Mm-hmm. And I really like that, because it's in line with kind of Jungian psychology of a non-localized part of the brain that is almost sort of you know, the informal divine, you know, the
Exactly.
non-localized, formless divine, and I love that about them. And what's funny is that they're arguing about the pronunciation, which is almost, because it's undefinable. It's almost you know, an expression of how puzzling that place is, even from a remote, even in its remoteness and its inaccessibility. So I don't think it's a mistake that we didn't end up filming there. I think it's Zaina being intuitive once again.
I think that's one of the saddest points in the film for me, just in terms of what Hannah's been through, because she has trouble remembering it. It is there. And Ruth, you almost made me cry in me tea. Thank you. It's an incredibly special place to them, and Hannah's been through so much that she can barely cling on to it. And who'd have thunk we'd talk about El Dorado as well, that great TV show. You know, Egyptian wigs and El Dorado. It's been a great Q&A.
It was cancelled far too early, before people realised just what greatness it was.
Before its time, Ian.
Jesse Birdsall was the De Niro of his generation.
I haven't missed anything.
Okay.
No, you really haven't. It was no, don't worry.
Luxor is now available on Curzon Home Cinema, and with all fingers crossed, we hope you'll be able to see it in cinemas when we hopefully open back up in a couple of weeks' time. You can also see Andrea in Possessor, Brandon Cronenberg's second film, on Curzon Home Cinema. I will say it is a brilliant film, but be warned, it does feature scenes of extreme violence. Thank you to Modern Films for organising this event, but most of all, thanks to Zaina, Andrea and Kareem. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.